at getting from A to B, there are a few things that you might need. A map, good tunes, or someone to feed you boiled sweets. But generally, a mode of transport and something to ride it on are enough to get you started. The earliest takes on road transport involved using horses and oxen to carry goods over roughly defined tracks. Road building in these cases was minimal and mostly involved shifting rocks and clearing trees, though swamps, fords and mountain passes required a bit more effort, of course. England got its first proper roads in 3300 BC, with the laying of corduroy roads in Glastonbury. These were constructed by placing logs side by side to form a continuous track. The result looks a little like corduroy fabric, hence the name. Needless to say, since then we've come a long way from naming our roads after trousers, though fact fans will be pleased to know that there is a trousers lake in Canada, complete with right and left leg lakes. Today, Britain boasts an estimated 246,700 miles of road, traversed by as many as 38 million licensed vehicles. Not surprisingly, we've talked quite a lot about vehicles on this podcast, but this month we'll be turning our attention to what they're riding on, the roads and other infrastructure that allows us to move from place to place. Welcome back to Journey Makers, the podcast exploring not just what the future looks like, but how we're going to get there. Each month, we take on one of the big questions facing the future of mobility. In this episode, we're talking about infrastructure, and the big question we're asking is, how can we ensure that our infrastructure is able to accommodate driverless cars? When we talk about transport infrastructure, typically it refers to all of the fixed installations that keep the country moving. So in the context of cars, lorries, vans and the like, this means roads, fueling stations, signage and lots more. But in conversations about connected and autonomous vehicles, the role that this traditional infrastructure might play is suddenly called into question. In fact, as we'll hear later, some people envision the future of transport infrastructure to be almost totally unrecognisable from what we see today. As ever, there's a huge amount to consider, so we've tapped up a panel of experts to help us navigate this new territory. Offering their wisdom this month is...
I'm Bridget Rosewell. I'm a commissioner with the National Infrastructure Commission, and I recently chaired the competition for Roads for the Future, which we organised.
And...
My name is Nick Chrysos. I'm the head of innovation, director of innovation for Cisco for Europe, Middle East, Africa and Russia. Our interest in autonomous vehicles is infrastructure.
And finally...
Hello, I'm Annie Turner and I am the editor of IoT Now Transport, and my role is to look at the very many aspects of autonomous and driverless cars, what's needed, where we're going and how soon we think we're going to get there.
For Bridget, in her role at the National Infrastructure Commission, any discussion of future infrastructure has to incorporate a distinction between connected and autonomous.
I think we need to think carefully about the difference, or be clear about the difference between connected and autonomous. So an autonomous vehicle can operate actually with very limited connectivity, because what it needs to do is recognise where it is in relation to the road surface and the surrounding vehicles, other moving parts, if you like. And that is an integrated camera system. It's a radar system, so it's just seeing where it is in relation to, say, the vehicle in front, and a camera to recognise where those lines are. And then you can have, it doesn't have to be autonomous, so a human can then say, I want to move into that lane, click the indicator, and the car can then do the rest. It doesn't need connectivity to do that. But it does need connectivity if it's going to navigate, if it's going to choose a route, if it's going to be useful in the context of a traffic management system, which is a kind of bigger network thing, not just the car on this road in relation to these other vehicles.
This is an important point to make, and one that has particular relevance for those of us with an interest in infrastructure. It's already possible for driverless vehicles to operate on our roads. Asking them to perform more complex autonomous tasks, however, will require a greater degree of connectivity within the infrastructure. But before we can reach the stage of fully autonomous vehicles, says Bridget, there are more pressing matters, beginning, perhaps fittingly, with the very surface of our roads.
So I think the way that we need to think about that technology infrastructure is right down to the surface of the road. So, for example, one of the things that at least presently autonomous vehicles need, and I suspect for some while, is a way to know where the edge of the road is. That's a white line. They work off the white lines. So we'll need to be maintaining those surfaces much more intensively than we currently do. Otherwise, the car might get lost. Or indeed, there's lots of rural roads which have no such linings at all, no marks. And we need to think about how the car recognises where it is on the road, let alone how it's recognising the other vehicles, the pedestrians and everything else. It has to know where the road is. So there's a very basic piece of technology, if you like.
A humble lick of paint. In many ways, this demonstrates just how important infrastructure will be to the success of driverless vehicles. Bridget notes that we're now in a position to get on with designing systems which can incorporate a new mix of vehicle types. The National Infrastructure Commission recently ran a competition looking for innovative and creative ideas on how to deliver a world-class road network in the UK that's ready for connected and autonomous vehicles.
So one of the winners of our Roads for the Future competition, Leeds City Council, was actually a traffic engineer in Leeds City Council, a young guy who could see all the opportunities that connectivity would give for a traffic management system to recognise the build-up of vehicles in different directions in a more sophisticated way and further away than even the most modern traffic light systems are able to do at the moment. So they could use information about where the vehicle is, about how fast it was approaching, about how many of them there were, in a more sophisticated fashion to facilitate the movement of traffic around the city centre. So that's one example of how traffic management works. At the moment, in city centres and in London, there are humans who do that. There are humans who use the cameras and to make those kind of judgments. So the availability of increased connectivity enables you to make quicker decisions. It helps the humans to make better decisions when they are needing to make those decisions when something goes wrong, and would just generally improve how traffic management works. So that's one example of the kind of infrastructure that we'll need.
Ultimately, though, Bridget believes that for the time being at least, our road networks will need to be able to accommodate traffic of both the human-driven and driverless varieties. And she looks to the staying power of traffic lights as an example here.
There will need to be something which is like a traffic light system. There may not be lights on sticks, but I suspect actually there'll be lights on sticks for a long, long time, because I don't think we will be able to remove cars driven by humans from the roads very easily. And think about motorbikes. Nobody's got an autonomous motorbike. So unless you're going to ban all that kind of vehicle, which I don't think is very likely, at least not in a reasonable technology lifetime, at any rate, the technology will have moved on by the time you could do that, then you will need those lights on sticks, much as we will have them on the railway as well, even though we've also got digital stuff going on too.
In some places, Bridget says, there will be little change.
I think that there are areas where people will continue to want to and will find it convenient to be in charge of their own wheels, particularly off-road country, particularly on, in big locations that don't have metalled roads. I can see a whole variety of places where you might still not want to be completely autonomous or indeed connected. So I think we need a different solution for urban areas, we need a different solution for intercity and sort of motorway network, major roads network, and we'll probably need a different solution and maybe a much less technically focused one in rural areas. And there's nothing wrong with that.
From this point of view, flexibility is everything. This is particularly the case given that only a tiny fraction, around 3% of Britain's roads, are motorways and centrally managed A roads. The vast majority of our roads, some 263,000 miles, are managed by local authorities. So for now, it will be up to them to decide on what's best for their road users. Our infrastructure will need to accommodate a broader range of vehicles than ever before, and conducting real-world tests will be key to understanding just how to make this vision a reality. Following this, Cisco's Nick Chrysos argues that connected and autonomous vehicles should be viewed as part of a much wider system, and that the real intelligence will lie in the infrastructure, not just the wheeled machines rolling around it.
So at the moment, the concept is that we put a lot of intelligence in the vehicles in order to make them able to cope with all the vulnerables and all the factors around them. The minute that you create an autonomous vehicle system, which is the dream of what we're trying to do, vehicles are nothing more than the pods in a much wider system. And the minute that you do this, the intelligence actually moves from the vehicle to the rest of the infrastructure. The vehicle will still have all the autonomy for safety, to know when to stop, to know when to, how to do things. But then there must be a superior kind of a central kind of intelligence that will be able to manage all the pods together. And that will give what we're looking for from this kind of intelligent mobility of the future, which is the autonomous vehicles.
Understood in this way, it's possible to argue that connected and autonomous vehicles won't reach their full potential without robust and complementary infrastructure on which to run. This approach opens up the possibility of things such as bidirectional connectivity, with cars not only receiving information about their surroundings, but providing additional data back to it as well. Anything from weather sensors to air quality information could provide invaluable microdata to authorities responsible for managing the roads. Now, these might seem like heady ambitions, so what exactly will an infrastructure capable of supporting this vision need to incorporate?
When we look into the infrastructure, there are three main elements that we are focusing on. Reliable connection. So what happens if the connection loses the car loses the connection with the infrastructure, and what's going to happen then? The second part is high bandwidth. How much data do we need to flow up and down, and will the infrastructure be able to allow the data to flow without any restrictions? And the third element is what we call latency. How fast is the turnaround of data? Now, all three of them have a different impact. If you cannot achieve reliability, then you will never be able to deploy the autonomous cars. If you do not achieve the high bandwidth, that means that you will not be able to monitor, you will not be able to give the right information. Again, you will not be able to do it. And the latency has to do with the intelligence that I described before. The lowest the latency, the more remote you can make the intelligence. So the faster you can talk to the vehicle, the more intelligent you can make the infrastructure. So all three of them have to be in place to make it happen. Now, all is technology that we have today. The question is not so much if the technology will be able to cope, but are we going to invest in the infrastructure to make it happen?
It's important to note at this stage that while things like reliability, bandwidth and latency aren't necessarily new concepts, they take on a whole new significance when applied to driverless vehicles. A second of latency when playing an online game or streaming a film can be an irritant. It might have a slightly bigger impact for a stockbroker or a commodities trader, but for a connected car travelling at high speed, the consequences could be much graver. Nick suggests that 5G, with its promises of high bandwidth, low latency, high reliability and broad network availability, could provide the level of connectivity required to operate a safe and secure road network. If that is, the technology does deliver on these promises.
So you do need connectivity, you do need network, you do need ubiquitous network. You need network everywhere and to the same capability as you have at the moment in very few areas. Will 5G be the solution? 5G for different people mean different things. 5G is talking about high bandwidth, 5G is talking about low latency, 5G is talking about high reliability and high availability of the network. If 5G delivers all that, then 5G could be the infrastructure, but it's not exclusive.
Anyone who spent any time in the UK's greener and more pleasant lands, however, will be more than aware that connectivity is far from a ubiquitous commodity. According to Ofcom, just 18% of rural premises can receive an indoor 4G service from all operators, compared to 64% of premises in urban areas. This, Nick says, presents a challenge for the rollout of connected and autonomous transport, one that goes beyond Bridget's challenge of a lack of painted white lines on the road. More than just a digital divide, he says, this represents a mobility divide.
So I think it's more than the digital divide. Digital divide is based on high connectivity in urban areas and low connectivity in rural areas. And that creates the kind of digital divide on the availability of the digital services. When we go into the autonomous cars, we will have areas with autonomous cars capable to run and areas that the autonomous car will not be able to run. And that's not going to be just a digital divide, it's going to be almost like a mobility divide. And we do expect this to be the impact. We do expect to see autonomous cars first in the center of the cities, not even wider in the cities. And then we expect to see them distributing slower and slower. I think the rural areas will be the last ones to really accommodate autonomous cars. Now, again, you have to think about the definition of the autonomous car. We have connected autonomous cars today that they can park themselves, they have a lot of safety elements. These will still become better and better. And what the autonomous car that I'm talking about is this kind of single system that makes everything work with each other, seamlessly, providing a mobility service that we've never seen before. And I think that it will be impossible to say that it's going to be distributed in all the areas at the same time.
Despite this challenge, Nick's ultimate aim is one of ubiquitous connectivity. In fact, in the face of the many infrastructure questions raised by the prospect of autonomous vehicles, he says that the need for connectivity is one thing we can be absolutely sure of.
There is a re-evaluation, if you really take a leap in front, 15 years from now, into autonomous cars on the streets, and then you try to see what are we going to need. Are we going to need 6 lanes of motorways? Are we going to need multiple lanes of cars? Are we going to need signs? If you don't have any more people looking at the signs, do you need a sign? Do you need traffic lights? Do you need anything that is designed to interface with a human being? Or do you just make everything automatic? So there is a big question about how much of the infrastructure of today is going to be needed tomorrow. We're going to need the space, but are we going to need car parks? Are we going to need places, curbsides to park? So does this mean that we're going to need much smaller roads? Does this mean that we're going to need, we don't need any more car parks, underground or off-the-road car parks? All these are questions that at the moment will define what this infrastructure will look like, the physical infrastructure will look like. One thing that I can guarantee to you is that all this infrastructure will need to be ultimately connected. Everything from sensors on the road to all the cars, they have to be properly connected and very, very highly connected to the infrastructure that exists.
And like Bridget, Nick says that for the time being at least, our driving infrastructure will need to accommodate both the driven and the driverless.
Well, that is going to be the transition. That is going to be the transition from the one technology to the other. And then the speed of this transition, it will define the amount of the disruption. This is critical. So what we're doing now, NSMLL is a good example of this. We're deploying infrastructure on top of existing infrastructure. We're almost doubling up the infrastructure. We're putting advanced networking on top of what already exists, and we're defining what needs to be there for the autonomous vehicles to work. It's almost guaranteed that we're going to go through this kind of merging of the two infrastructures until we define what we need and what we don't need. Don't forget also the other element. Until we have drivers on the streets, that they drive real cars, we need every single bit of the infrastructure that we have today. So this maybe here puts the predicament that everybody's thinking but they don't want to voice. Are we ever going to have a situation which we're going to have autonomous cars, full autonomous cars, and real drivers on the same streets when they need completely different infrastructure, and the merging of the two systems might be the biggest hurdle that we can ever overcome.
I think right now we're all caught up in rather a lot of hype. I think we might be a little overexcited and overlooking some of the terribly mundane aspects, which is very human of us. We like the new stuff. We're not so keen on the boring detail in the background.
Annie Turner, editor at IoT Now Transport, argues that, for the now at least, we'll only see driverless vehicles deployed in their own separate environments, for safety reasons as much as anything else.
I think really what we're going to see in the first instance is going to be deployments in little islands. We are not going to see, driverless cars belting up and down our roadways as commonly as at the moment cars that are driven by people are. But the only way these things are going to be possible is if they are in separate, secure infrastructure away from humans and the road systems we have now. And that makes for a lot of interesting questions about how we can do that, because in many of our cities, where's the space to do that? Never mind anything else.
Like Nick, Annie sees connected infrastructure as absolutely fundamental to the success of driverless vehicles, and she's putting her hat in the ring for 5G too, so long as it can integrate with other forms of coverage.
We can't afford any blip, no matter how short, in the connectivity with the infrastructure and all the other things that make up that environment. So that absolutely secure, 100 and something % reliable connectivity, perfect coverage, enough capacity, that's a critical element, and perhaps sort of is the most basic ingredient of all. Before we do anything else or think about anything else, how are we going to A, provide that, and B, assure it? And probably the biggest enabler from a connectivity point of view of driverless vehicles is the arrival of 5G networks, which is imminent during this year. But that too is only going to be built out in pretty small areas to start with, and it's a step forward like we've never seen in mobile communications in terms of the capacity it offers and the coverage and the speed. But it's going to be slow because we have to be sure that it works properly before we really build it out. And to me, 5G enabling driverless cars is how it's going to go. Except there will not be 5G everywhere, and we're going to have to rely in some places on it being beautifully and tightly integrated with older technologies such as 4G and with Wi-Fi. And again, you can't have any, you can't let the cracks show between where one network hands on to the next.
Annie suggests infrastructure should go beyond connectivity too, and include things like battery power.
I do think as well we've got quite a long way to go with stuff that's boring, that we don't really like to dedicate much time to. And battery power is a huge thing, right? If we're going to have cars that stop because they've run out of battery in a platoon lane, that could be a bit of a pain as well, right?
Following the widely held assumption that cabs will be mostly powered by electricity, it's clear that considerations will need to be made as to how these vehicles will stay juiced. Will they recharge at homes, at roadside docking stations? Or will we start to see inductive charging technology built into stretches of road that will allow cars to charge on the go? These are all current technological possibilities. But as Bridget's point about painted white lines made clear, we need to get the basics right first. Either way, Annie is enthused by the very prospect.
There is nothing I would like more than an autonomous vehicle. I think it would transform my life. I mean, it takes a week by camel to get anywhere out of Norfolk. So, I mean, if that drive time could be spent more usefully and more safely and in a way that's better for the environment, what is not to like?
What is not to like, indeed. If you can stomach a fairly dreadful pun, I think it's fair to say our conversations today have laid a solid foundation for what has to happen next to make our infrastructure CAV ready. Road conditions and connectivity will be vital, and testbeds like those provided by SMLL will offer the opportunity to test out what works and what doesn't, as well as exploring more distant issues like how signage will work and how exactly connected and autonomous vehicles will communicate with the world and people around them. Estimates vary as to how soon the connected infrastructure we require will be widely available, But as we made clear in our first episode on policy, this is the route that we're going down in the UK. We'll be back next month to explore another hefty issue facing the future of mobility. Make sure you join us by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. And if there's a big question that you'd like to hear the experts tackle, then send us a tweet at smll_London. Until next time, see you in the future. How will you be getting there?